welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. Okay, this is a game of an opponent that Fischer has played before, Whistler, W-H-I-S-L-E-R. This is in 1956. Fischer plays the King's Indian defense. So this is kind of a interesting situation that we find here. D4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3. So they're going through the King's Indian defense. E4, d6. It'll prepare for his e5 push, f3, and Fischer castles. He castles early, which is what you usually do in the King's Indian defense. I mean, hey, pure, beautiful, fabulous logic. And now that famous e5 thrust in the King's Indian defense. And this is one response to it. Gaining central space, putting a little bit of a cramp on the, making it so it's hard to get the knight to c6. But if black plays it right, he can still get a good development. Queen to d2, f5. Fischer did this famously quite a bit in his early games. I know Ben Feingold is completely against pushing the f-pawn. Fischer did it to pretty good effect if his opponents reacted right, and they usually did. He bumps that bishop back to f2. Now this particular position cramps white on the king side bad, doesn't it? Yeah. He's already castled on the queen side, so it's not a big deal. But his pieces just can't coordinate very well here in this kind of a cramp. So it's to Fischer's advantage to push those pawns. Instead of opening the position, Fischer closes it. And that means, of course, as we've always said, when the center is locked and closed, the pawns can't take, files can't be opened, then you go to the wings. You usually follow the direction your pawns are pointing. In this instance, they're pointing to this direction. So that will be the side that Fischer ought to work in hardest. And it appears that that is what he's doing. Bishop hitting the bishop. Maybe swap a bishop, perhaps. We shall see. Bishop, oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Bishop h4. And then bishop does bump down to g1. He didn't swap. He wants to keep his pieces. Hard for him to put them together in any sort of a logical way like Fischer appears to be able to do. We shall see. King to b1, that's a typical bump of a king. When you castle queenside, put that king over and it gives you a guard on the a2. I know the knight here does also, but sometimes this knight doesn't stick around, or else it's traded off. So it's important to do that. Fischer brings his bishop back home to visit the little lady and feed the horse. Whatever. Knight to c1. Looks like white wants to regroup here, and then Fischer does c5. He really is closing the board. It was a question mark and an exclamation point. Kind of interesting, but iffy. The knight c5 is probably a better option. However, the bishop would probably swap the knight, and then that opens up a file, gives him a chance to possibly push a pawn. You know, who knows. But Fischer chose this time to close the file. And then bishop to d3. When your bishop is bad, I mean your bishop is bad. This is not a developing move. This is a move to get the heck out of the way because I've got to manipulate some stuff. And that bishop can't do anything. So that could be beneficial for Fischer. Just so you can see, the pawn's on the same color as that bishop. And for all intents and purposes, it's just a tall pawn. It's actually obstructing lanes this way and this way for white. at this point. It doesn't mean it has to be that way the whole game. If you end up with the bishop like this, you need to, of course, then this is on the castle king side, yeah? So you need to get in here and start making pawn swaps, right? Yeah. Because a closed center here, he hasn't had the chance yet to trade off his bad bishop for white's good one. You can see, though, the black pawns make the black squared bishop, I should say the pawns on the dark squares makes black dark squared bishop bad too. But it seems he has more room here to actually do something constructive up on the king side. So I don't, of course then, you know, the bishop can come over to here and start hitting targets that way too. So at this point, just pointing out that's a bad bishop. It's not going to do a lot for the next few moves. He is more or less getting out of the way. And then the knight on d to f6. See, here comes Fischer trying to put 2 and 2 together on a kingside attack. You know, though, the question, the impression is that he's closed off too much of the board. I don't know. We'll see. Knight 1 to e2. Knight comes to e8. Rook to f1. It seems like white is more or less just rearranging his furniture in his house. Doesn't it? Yeah. I might be missing something, but now he comes on the rampage. Here he comes, g4. And the knight comes back to f6. And now, here he comes h4. And actually, this pawn push can be white's attack on black, can't it? Very interesting to see this. So Fischer is going to take precautions, put his pawns on the same row here. You want to be careful of that. Knight comes back to c1. You do have a rook, and, well, that's closed, though. A rook and a bishop back in the... it's not really an attack. It does gain more space because this arrangement doesn't do a lot. See, his own pawns are keeping his bishop hemmed in, and the way Bobby has played his pawns, it also hems in the dark squared bishop of white. Unless he dares bump up here off the castle king side to try to open up the center. But the problem is opening up your king side like that just to open the center. That's, I wouldn't think that would be a good strategy personally. From my own view, that would make me nervous. If that's what I thought I had to do, I would try to find something else, truly. And now here comes h5. Yeah, white is on the attack. We can see that. And now look what Fischer does. g5. Completely seals it off. Now, in this instance, this board should, as a general rule, favor the knights. We'll see, won't we? But wow, I mean, that's pretty much all the way across the board sealed. Kind of an interesting situation. King comes to c2. Kind of a weird looking game. I don't know if Bobby ever did that in his later games or not. We'll find out, won't we? When it happens later on, remember this one and you can refer back to it. He did that once. We'll see if he ever does. I don't know. That's a tough issue there. Knight to b3. Notice here come the knights. they're the only ones that can technically hop over the pawn, so it makes sense that they're going to try to activate the knights, yeah? I mean, sincerely. And now knight f6. Although there's not a lot they can do at this point. It looks like both players are just basically more or less trying to figure out, okay, where's the best place for the pieces, because the entire board, except for this side, is sealed. Really, truly. Quite fascinating. Bishop d7, I did that. Now bishop to f2. So we're kind of tinkering, trying to figure out queen to e8. Not a whole lot. Notice something else. With a closed position like this, the center being locked, both have, the whole thing is almost completely filled in. Both of them have control of the center. But it doesn't mean a lot if the center is so locked, does it? He's got 3 or 4 or 5 pieces, so does he. Yeah, and so they can't get to each other. There's no open files. You can't open a file with the pawns, so the rooks are virtually useless. That's 2 of our 3 pillars, isn't it? So the third pillar becomes exquisitely important. Gotta find some targets. If you can't find targets, both Jeremy Silman and Artur Yusupov say you have to create those. Well, let's see what they do. This is a fascinating, I mean, they still have every piece. There isn't one thing that's been swapped yet, and we're on move 25. Very interesting situation. He's 13 years old, so this makes it kind of interesting, doesn't it? Rook goes back over to b1. Okay, notice how the king has somewhat shuffled, and now perhaps he's thinking, if I put my rooks over there, then I can press those pawns and actually really truly attack and break something open. I can use my knights possibly and my pawn. So that looks to be like what Whistler is thinking here, which would be about the only thing you can do, really. If you've got that much of the board just locked, you have to put your big pieces over here and throw the pawns down there with the knights, because everything is locked. That looks like what Whistler is doing, doesn't it? Watch Bobby. Bam, b5. Okay, let's go. Let's open this up. Let's see what you got, cowboy. Yeah, baby. And the knight goes back to d2. They almost, it gives you a feel that they're hesitating to engage, doesn't it? You know, they're like the samurai, throwing your sword around and all, but nobody's really clashing and attacking and thrusting and stabbing. They're all just kind of moving here and there. Knight d2. Bobby makes the first bona fide attack. In the process, see, my suspicion is Bobby sees that Whistler really is putting his pieces in a more advantageous position for opening up that side and coming through. A lot of Fischer's power is over here, not over there. Whistler, through time, has been shifting everything that way. Yeah? So Bobby hurries and opens a file hopefully into Whistler's territory, threatening the pieces before Whistler can do that. It appears to me that's what Fischer is thinking and doing. And before he starts pushing this pawn and opening it up too much for his rooks, Fischer maybe ought to think about bopping his queen over here and getting her up and over so that he has his power pieces on the only 2 open files that's going to exist at this point. because these are going to be blockaded, of course. Doubled pawns are going to be blockaded, but it sure pinned that knight, didn't it? Or I mean bishop. Knight. He got a bishop out of that, is what he did. That's what it looks like to me. Except that the knight takes c4. Otherwise, Whistler would have lost that bishop. So at this point, we do have an open file. No one's occupying or a partial open for black. White has maneuvering room real easy with his knights. Boy, there's an outpost there that's just a screaming eagle, isn't it? That would have to be swapped, which in turn would open up the center more. So this can get interesting pretty quick within the next 5 moves or so. And here's the issue with this entire game. At this point, Whistler noted later on, as he was contacted to give this game, he noted the end of the game is missing. The rest of the game it was recorded, but we don't know where it's at. And you're going, are you kidding me, man? This was such a unique closure of 3/4 of the board. But Whistler admits White lost. Fischer won, but we don't know what happened. Now look, I committed to showing every one of Fischer's tournament games. There's one there. However, let's play through it just a little bit more. Now we're speculating. Now we're doing variations and ideas. But let's do this for a minute. What would happen? Let's continue this in a speculative, let's show a variation here or there idea and see what could have happened. Queen comes to d1. Now knight comes up to b5. See, Fischer's going to be on the attack. He's going to, in my opinion, really truly, he should be pushing stuff this way because Whistler's got enough here that he might be able to do something significant. Rook to c1. Knight to d4 check. What a terrific outpost that could have been. It wouldn't surprise me if that's something similar to what Bobby would have done. King comes to b1, of course. This is just my variation that I worked through. Knight would take f3 in this variation. And queen takes f3. And you're wondering, what the heck? Hold on, don't get excited. Bishop takes g4. Nice little opening of the locked position, yes. Queen g2 would bump down, of course. Bishop takes h5, and so the pawns are unlocked, giving black superb potential on this end of things. Knight to knight to a5. Rook back to a8. Queen to f1. And queen to g6. Knight to c6. Here, the knight's getting in here, hitting the bishop. Bishop would bump down to d8, perhaps. Queen to g2. Bishop to g4. Bishop takes c5. Down goes another pawn. Now we can see that locked huge pawn chain is just about gone, yeah? And f3, push the pawn, absolutely. It's a passed pawn, man. Queen could come to g3. D... Are you kidding me? Yeah, no. D takes c5. Takes the bishop. Boy, I thought I miswrote something. Knight takes e5. See, now they're starting to dance a little bit. Bishop to c7. Nice pin on the knight, putting in some tactics here. Knight would take the queen anyway. saying, I'm not interested in your tactic. I want the queens off the board. And the bishop takes g3. Exchanges are made. The board is opening up. At this point, the thing that's observable in this particular variation is black does have the bishop pair and white has a strong center, even though white is a pawn down. The other disadvantage, well, the majority of pawns is on this side, and every one of those are passed pawns. They don't have any pawn opposing them. So in this variation, I would argue that this pawn is just as close as this, but, well, this pawn's closer. This pawn and this pawn are the, well, no, that pawn's closer too. It'd be a heck of a race. Of course, both rooks can stop the pawns. Both rooks can stop the pawns. So it would be an interesting continuation if I had more time, but that's just one variation I came up with to show that the game had a high potential interest, and unfortunately, we don't get to see the end of that game. Darn it. But I told you I was going to show you all of Bobby Fischer's tournament games. The interesting thing here, something we learned that does involve the three pillars, just so we're aware, is with such a huge area of the board closed, pawns locked, the center, control of the center becomes less vital, and rooks on open files become less likely. So the focus should shift to targets and tactics. Kind of something cool extra to learn in a game that we don't have completely. So there's still value in this game for us. All right, there's your video. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was a fascinating game. I really hope someday the ending can be found. That'd be groovy. Hopefully Fischer wrote it down somewhere, or Whistler did. So, have a good time studying chess. I will see you at the BYP fan club on Lychus. It is getting fun. There's like 153 of us now. It's growing leaps and bounds, really excellent, which is a lot of fun. We're seeing a lot of new names. Let me say, if you're challenging people to a match, let's say a 10-minute match each side or whatever, and they decline or whatever, don't think they're rude, because we're on a worldwide basis, and so our time zones are different. You might see someone is online in the club playing chess. If they don't immediately accept, you know, try again another time or whatever, we're still getting used to coordinating the different time zones around the world. So it's really weird. Half of my viewers are asleep right now while I'm making this video, and when I upload it, they'll be asleep for another 8 hours before they even see it. So, I mean, that's the way it works. Some of you will see it right now. So, anyway, thanks again for all your support and help and wisdom and knowledge and excitement to improve this game with us. It is a lot of fun. We will see you in the next Backyard Professor Chess video.